Some men are born under a wandering star, but mine was not a birth star, but a birth comet, 3552 Don Quixote. Ask someone who finds human meaning in the conjunctions of stars and planets, ask her to draw up my natal chart, and when she's done, she'll show you the mark where comet 3552 Don Quixote was crossing the Earth's orbit at the moment of my birth. She'll explain how, at certain points in the decades of his orbits around the Sun, Don Quixote would also have experienced certain gravitational attractions and so absorbed influences from both Mars and Jupiter as he crossed their orbits. And certainly it's possible to review my family history, examine my father's story and his brothers and their fathers' stories, and readily observe the growth, expansion and prosperity bestowed by Jupiter, while the influence of Mars would account for the concomitant distortion of willpower, the urge to insanity and violence, which always would reduce their prosperity to ashes. With 3552 Don Quixote in our night sky, none of us stood a chance. 1923, a year of expansion for Cricker, my grandfather, as he becomes owner of Una, a 60-ton sprit-sail barge registered in Harwich. By the time of his third son's birth, Cricker was a deteriorating alcoholic. For some reason, a bond grew up between the old man and that particular son, Colin, my father. In his own last years, divorced by my mother and shunned by his two sons, my father's best remaining memories would be the holidays of his youth spent working the family barges up and down the Orwell, the coastal trade routes and the channel crossings to France and Holland. Hard, heavy work for a young lad. But there was a zest of Fern Hill about his memories. Playing and golden in the mercy of time's means, young Colin was a prince among the watery sailing wagons. Such were his holidays, but his term times were harder, because it's hard to have your schoolmasters constantly remark your failure to achieve your elder brother's easy brilliance, a brilliance which eventually proved too easy for at least one of those brothers. And meanwhile, Colin grew into an unhappy, resentful young man, prone to rage. About the time Cricker died, my father became reborn, totally immersed in the Baptist persuasion, the loving embrace of the literal authority of the book. Grace through faith would let him down eventually, of course. His worship of the Word would proliferate into many secular texts, but throughout my early childhood, everything necessary was there in that ugly big black book, the perfect treasure of heavenly instruction without any mixture of error for its matter. He believed he'd found all the circuit diagrams, all the blueprints and flowcharts necessary for a man plagued with inferiority such as he to be father on earth to his own family, to be a happy, successful human, just like the Cricker of his imagination had been. And always, especially when white-lipped with rage and thrashing us with whatever came to hand, always he would command my brother and me to rejoice in the word of the Lord and learn that God definitely is not mocked. So, every day of rest, church and Sunday school just about done for the week, we'd go, me on the crossbar seat of his bicycle, my brother on the back of my mother's, down to Ipswich docks to have a look at which barges and other cargo vessels were in port. Likely, those summer barge holidays were calling out to him. Likely, trapped in a bleak, violent marriage and beginning to realise he was the focus of his son's fear and hate. Likely, he continued to mourn Cricker and the loss of the golden warmth and attention enjoyed by a special beloved son. Astride my narrow seat, I'd cling terrified, hands between his on the chrome handlebars, knowing that our trip to the docks would not be done this and every other Sunday morning until at least once he'd run the front wheel of his bike right up to the very edge of the dock. Only at the very last minute would he apply the brake levers while I'd be trying to look away from the dark, oily water between my feet and begging him to pull back. I'd had no contact with him for at least a decade when he died. Clearing out his unlovely semi was mainly a matter of shifting hundreds of books, so many secular Bibles, so many that their weight threatened structural damage, collapsed ceilings. It seemed that all those years later, my father still preserved the delusion that the written word would provide everything necessary to live his life. Absolutely everything. personal relationships, success in business, the love of God, maybe even how to get his family back. Meanwhile, guided by my own ragbag of charts and blueprints, and yes, these also culled from books, the ocean voyaging gypsy construct had begun to seem like the best fit for me, the synthetic persona most comfortable for one whose watery birth comet is in constant eccentric orbit around the sun. And somewhere along the way, I seem to have lost my fear of drowning in Ipswich docks.